Welcome to the Gifts from the Edge podcast, where you are about to meet parents and professionals, educators and entrepreneurs who have taken the path less traveled, and by doing that, have made all the difference. Now it's time to step out of the ordinary. Here's your host, Andrew Lord.
Hello everyone, this is the Gifts from the Edge podcast. My name's Andrew Lord, and this is The Edge, that special in-between place between work, between family, where you can stop, pause, take stock, and meet the mentor, where you can draw from their wisdom, their time off the beaten path, and you can use that to fuel your own journey. And today we are in for a very special treat. For those of you who have been following me for a while, you would know that we've got close to 100 episodes on our previous show, The Blueprint. But when I decided to launch this new show, I wanted to do that with someone who I believe embodies the message of mentorship and who epitomizes having, special moments of enlightenment on their journey. And that's why I'm really excited to be welcoming Arne Rubinstein onto the podcast. He's the CEO and founder of the Rites of Passage Institute. He has over 30 years experience as a medical doctor, a counselor, a mentor, a speaker, and a workshop facilitator. The programs he's helped to develop have been attended by more than 350,000 people globally. And these programs support boys and girls to make a safe, healthy transition into adulthood. That includes groups from all around the world, more than 40 different countries, and it also includes a revival of rites of passage for Aboriginal groups around Australia as well, which is absolutely amazing, absolutely awesome. One of his big goals is to make the rites of passage mainstream once again. It's so good to have you here. Thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm very happy to be here. The Edge, what a great place. It is. One of my favorite places to hang out. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. It can be a scary place. And I didn't necessarily tell you early on when I asked you to come on to this episode, but this is a special episode because I really do believe that there is synergy between the work that you do and the work that I do. Let's start right from the beginning. What is a rite of passage? Can you define that for us?
Absolutely. So a rite of passage is a transformation. It's something that happens in your life that changes you. We all go through rites of passage. We all go through events that will change us, that will make us we can't go backwards once we've been through a rite of passage. Once you move from being a child to being an adult, you can't go back to being a child again. You can act like a child, but you can't actually go back to being a child. Once you become a parent, that's a rite of passage. Once you become a grandparent, that's a rite of passage. When you pass on, when you die, that's a rite of passage. So these are all events that transform us. However, a properly run rite of passage is one that is facilitated and supports us on the journey in a healthy way. And unfortunately, given that we have lost a lot of the ability to do that properly, what we're finding is that people are creating their own rites of passage, or life is doing it to them, which creates this great risk that the actual rite of passage will be wounding and damaging and have long-term impact, which many people may not ever get over. And so our work is about creating healthy transformations in people's lives.
Yeah, cool. That's amazing. Can you give us an example of an unhealthy rite of passage?
Sure. Well, look, I worked as an emergency medicine doctor for many years, and I saw an over-representation of teenagers coming into my emergency department. And I was very interested in, for example, a lot of the boys, if they could find something to do with speed, wheels, height, jumping, anything, that they could push themselves to the limit. And interestingly, if they succeeded, then they would go and make it harder or higher or faster or something. So they were trying to create their own rites of passage. And we see the same in universities. We see it in boarding houses. We see it in hazing that happens in organizations like, unfortunately, the Defense Forces, where rites of passage are being created by peers for other peers, and they are universally, almost universally unhealthy. And I have to say, rites of passage are for girls as importantly for boys, and they're for all genders. And I often saw girls who would, you know, go out and just get drunk and do something that they've never done before and regret it for the rest of their lives, or get into situations that were just not right for them. So as soon as we start looking, we actually we realize that unhealthy rites of passage are right through our whole society. You know, the big rite of passage in Australia on your 18th or 21st is to get blind drunk. How is that a good rite of passage? Schoolies, when we send thousands of students who finish year 12 off to the Gold Coast, Byron Bay, Bali, Fiji, there's unlimited alcohol, drugs, sex, all available, and it's a disaster.
Yeah. Did you do any of these unhealthy things growing up, Arne?
I did everything I could do. I did everything I could get my hands on. You know, I had no healthy formal rite of passage. And I always say that from the age of 14, I had two lives, one that my parents knew about and one that they didn't know about. And I much preferred the one that they didn't know about, but we pushed it. And the bottom line is I got through, and I was lucky to get through when I look back on some of the stupid things I did, but there were those who didn't get through. And we see it more and more with the mental health issues and the suicide and the car accidents and the, you know, kids jumping off bridges or cliffs into the water, or drug overdoses. You know, all of these things are unhealthy rites of passage gone wrong.
My son, he's turning 12 very soon, and you know, we have an active Christian faith, and ever since he's been 10 years old, he's wanted to get baptized. You know, so he I said that he needs to wait till 12 because in the Jewish tradition, you know, that you become a man at that point. Do you think that there's such thing as rites of passage that can happen too soon? You know, because I feel like our society shies away from life commitment, but at the same time, that you feel like you want your kids to understand what the implications of the statement that they're making, or the decision that they're going through, you know?
Yeah, great. So it's a really good question about rites of passage happening too soon. So as I said, a rite of passage is a transformation that moves you from one stage in life to the next. And I look at it like there's a staircase that we're all moving up through life, from baby to child to young adult to grown up, maybe not, to parent, maybe to grandparent, to elder, and we have the same in our work lives. And each of these stages could and should be marked by a rite of passage. Now, there are historically some bigger events. So the transition from child to young adult is a huge event. The transition from adult to parent is a huge event. The transition when one of your own parent dies or someone close to you dies is a huge event. So these should be marked with a bigger and more strategic, planned, facilitated rite of passage. Now, your son is 12 and he is approaching the age where he's going to go through puberty and become a young adult. In the Jewish tradition, it was done at 13, actually. But to be honest, I actually think that is too young to say you are now a man. I actually went through a bar mitzvah. And that's not to say your son can't be going through rites of passage prior to the significant one when he becomes a young adult. But we run rites of passage for boys and girls becoming young adults, and we tend to do it more around 14 to 17 for the boys, and probably a year younger for the girls. And, you know, what we find is if they are too young, then they can hear the conversations and they can say the right things, but they don't have the lived experience of what we're talking about. So I always say, let's wait a little while. And what's really interesting is that historically, often it was the grandparents who would say when the child was ready to go through this rite of passage, because the parents would often either want to send them too early. Oh yeah, my son's ready to be a man, or would want to hold on to them too long and say, oh, I'm going to protect him and look after him. So it's quite a hard thing for a parent to make the decision. And we know that different children are ready at different ages. But we've found after they've physically, really gone through or started going through puberty, and when they've had a few things sort of not work out so well for them, or they're really pushing back and getting argumentative, or they've gotten in trouble somewhere, that's a good indicator that they're ready to go through something, and that when the discussions and the what happens in the rite of passage take place, that they will understand more deeply why it's going on at this time in their lives.
So there's nothing wrong with like, I know some parents' mentality would be, okay, let's make this happen before the wheels fall off, before the shit hits the fan, so to speak, but you're saying, let that happen and let that move the process forward.
You possibly don't want all the wheels falling off, but when the wheels are getting shaky,
and
when you will know, like your 12-year-old, when he says, Dad, you're a, whatever he will say, but he'll say it, and he's locking the door and he's starting to grunt and he's maybe giving a bit of lip back to mum, and it's like, hey, this is not, that's the time when you go, all right, we got to do something.
You've got 2 sons, right?
I do.
Yeah. Did you do rites of passage or some form of that with your boys?
Absolutely, I did. My boys are now 30 and 32 years of age, and they are independent young men. And that's a whole nother thing. There's a rite of passage for a father when your boys get to a certain age where, they are their own young men. But I took both my boys at the age of 14 through a rite of passage. So we run a program called The Making of Men, and we take boys and their dads, and we have a similar program for girls and mums. And actually, we're looking at starting off a mixed gender one, and we go away for anywhere from 4 to 5 days, and there's no phones, no technology, and it's one of the most extraordinary things that you can do with your child. They get to hear the stories of adults, and they go through challenges. They make a vision for what sort of adult they want to become. And we do an honoring process, which is really beautiful and based on the theory that each of them has their own unique gifts and talents, their own genius and spirit. And our role as elders, parents, and caregivers is to find and identify and name the different gifts, talents, genius, and spirit that is in each of the young ones, because what we really want is to encourage that to come out. We want them to be themselves rather than what they're seeing on social media, or rather than what, the culture is telling them they're supposed to be if they're going to be a strong man, a good woman, or, whatever this messaging is that is so strongly in all of their lives and often is not in their best interest.
Yeah. No, it's so good that you say that. A lot of the coaching work that I do with adults, they're usually late 30s, early 40s. They have followed the rules all their lives, and they've hit that point in their life where they're looking down the line of another, 30, 40 years and going, is this it? Is this all life has to offer? Am I being authentic to myself? And it turns out that they haven't gone through any sort of a process to say, who am I? What do I want to, what do I want my life to represent? And, that's a process that I go through as part of my coaching. And it's like, from a facilitator's point of view, it's so rewarding to see that.
Yeah, well, that would be incredibly, they are lucky to have that and to do that work with you. And I'll say, by now they're 30, 40, and they've been doing that for 20 years, and they're on a train and they know they're on the wrong train, and it can be really, really hard to get off it, if not impossible, often it feels. And so our whole thing is, and I recognize that place, our whole thing is, wow, imagine if we could start that when they're 14, 15.
Yes.
And so, really get them to work out who they are, what they're passionate about, what they love doing, what they're good at, what their natural strengths are, and encourage and support them to do that from an early
Mm.
age. It's a
Yeah.
whole different ball game, and then they don't have to compensate in their 20s, 30s, and 40s when they're unhappy with what they're doing, and then it just, the outcome is completely different.
And it's so much harder when people are that much further down the track, because there's a mortgage,
Yeah,
there's a partner, there's kids involved. It's
yeah,
can be a messy process.
that's right. That's right.
Mm. Yeah, cool. You mentioned uh, processes for older people. My wife used to help facilitate a birth circle, and that was particularly for mums, getting ready to go into the birth process. And it was a positive. They mostly just went around, told positive stories, because a lot of what happens around birth is a fear-based process, which can slow the whole process down anyway. Um, what are your thoughts? I know you mentioned it earlier, but what are your thoughts about rites of passage for parents? Do you think those ceremonies are worth continuing and have benefits?
Oh, absolutely. I think they're worth continuing. I think having them at all ages is fantastic. And, we run a 3-day rites of passage leadership training, which is around the rite of passage framework. And the way I teach it up here in Byron is a combination of education and experiential. So we tell them the theory, but everyone goes through a rite of passage. And on our trainings, we have people from late teenagers to people in their 60s or sometimes even 70s. And every person, is at a stage where they're either, reviewing where they're at, or knowing that they need to go through a shift and change some things. And I think at any stage, any of us can go, all right, and it's important to go, let's have some time out, look at what we're doing, review whether it's what we really want to do and feel we're supposed to be doing, identify the areas we need to change in our lives, and make a plan and a commitment to how we're going to do things better going forwards. And if we never do that process and we just keep doing what we're doing today because it's what we did yesterday, then the danger is we end up 40, 50, 60 and just doing something just because that's what we've always done, even if it might be the totally wrong thing for us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think at all, it's really important to be periodically reviewing what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah. I think it changes and emerges too. Like, we have this core identity, but as that grows, we need to take new looks at it, because it's a new thing
Yeah, of course.
every day. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how I am as a teenager will and should be different from how I am in my 20s. And how I am in my 20s, let's say I end up with a partner and children. So how I am in my 20s will be different before I have children. And it's supposed to be. And then,
Yeah.
I'm about to turn 60 at the end of the year. So that is going to be different, how I live my life, to how I was in my 40s or 20s or a teenager. And so at each point, it's important to take some time. I'm currently thinking, how do I want to be as an elder? What sort of elder do I want to be? How do I be a good elder? And it's really important that we are looking at all these different stages. Otherwise, if people never go through a rite of passage and never review, we actually end up with a whole heap of children and teenagers running the world,
Yeah.
or people who think and function as children and teenagers. If you look at some of our major global leaders and some of the things that are going on, it's like, oh my God, we've got children in charge and in positions of enormous power.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a scary thing. Yeah. I do have one of the things that triggered me seeking you out was a parent coming into me and asking, because I run a youth program. I'll talk about that in a minute. And her boy went through that, but she said, would I do a camp? Would I do a youth program? And I thought about it, and I thought, I don't have the bandwidth, and I don't have the experience to do that. But I knew of you, and I went and did a little bit more research. But What's the best way for for families who might be interested in getting some of their kids involved in some of your programs? What's the best way for them to
Yeah.
do that?
Well, look, our aim is to make rites of passage mainstream again. Our aim is that it should be normal, that when your child reaches a certain age, they go with one of their parents, and we involve both the parents, but they actually go and they do a program that really celebrates and acknowledges that they're shifting from child to young adult. And that's a big, serious shift. You can't do it in 10 minutes, and you can't do it just by, wanting it to happen. You really want it done well and properly and taken seriously. And
Can't
so
get an
we
app for
run
that.
pardon?
Can't get an app for that.
No, you can't get an app for that. So we no, you can't get an app for that. Oh my gosh, whole nother line of conversation. So yes, we run programs up here I have a purpose-built campsite. I bought 150 acres in the Byron hinterland 25 years ago, and we've set it up as a camping and training facility. And so we do two things. One is we run camps up here with our facilitators who've had, years and years of training and experience. But we also do a lot of training, starting with our 3-day the Rites of Passage framework leadership training, so that people can really understand what a rite of passage is, and then potentially create their own, or in their school create one. So we work with a lot of schools now. We're working with more and more schools around how they can bring rites of passage into the school camps, for example, because school camps are a perfect opportunity, but most school camps are activities based and really don't have any significant impact at all. How can we do that a little bit better, or a lot better? And we are open source. So through our training, we've helped schools and communities set up programs in, probably maybe 50, 60 places around Australia, and, 40 countries around the world. So we want to both create an opportunity if people want to come to our camps here in Byron, and it's on our website, the Rites of Passage Institute, and we're really keen on training people and giving them all the knowledge we can around rites of passage and supporting them to create their own in their families, communities, places of work, or schools.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, it's not going to spread. It's not going to go mainstream by us running them all. That's for sure. That's impossible. Plus, how a rite of passage is done in different places will vary according to the culture of the place that it's being run. The elements will be the same. So there's always story sharing, for example, but how they share stories and the stories that come out will be different in different places. There'll always be challenges, but the challenge will be different depending on where you live and the environment. So it's important to recognize the framework remains the same, but the culture of the place that it's being done will determine the actual process.
Yeah, cool. I might just pick your brains on that just a little bit. I run a youth program. It's called Adventure Quest. It's for 10 to 15-year-olds. And we've got some kids in that stick with it for 2 to 3 years. We have these levels. They start off as a seeker and they go through all these different levels and they end up as a champion. And what I see, what describes a champion is someone who's not just doing the things that we train about on the program, they're now doing it as part of their life. They show me evidence that it's become a fabric of who they are. And I guess what I'm curious to know your opinion on is, do you think these protracted, these long-term rites of passage still have value and merit, or do you think that a rite of passage, by definition, needs to be that short, sharp, have a bit of a memorable wow factor about it? My program still has a wow factor, but it's a much longer experience.
Yeah, Andrew, I actually think it's both. I think it's both. A child doesn't become an adult overnight. Well, unless something bad happens, or there's if there's a tragedy, some people do say, "Hey, I grew up overnight." But having the long program where they get increasing responsibilities and they get recognized differently, and that's fantastic, and I'd hugely recommend that. It's like going to school or going to a boarding school. That's a rite of passage over the period of time you're there, and you're learning new things and doing new things and taking on extra responsibilities, hopefully, as you're getting older. But mixed in with that, I would also have retreats or camps or events that are specifically marking and acknowledging that this person is entering a new stage.
Yeah.
So it's a both. It's a yes and answer.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's good. I didn't have this question written down, but it's one that's sort of come up for me as we've been talking. And that is one of my clients, she's recently had a parent pass away. And you mentioned before that, death being a rite of passage. And in our conversations, we've just talked about how similar death or this experience for her has been to birth. There's spiritual elements that that just feel like birth to her, and it's this surreal kind of a feeling. Have you seen any really healthy ways or powerful ways for people to embrace that process and go through it in healthy ways?
Well, first of all, I love what you're saying. Part of my medical career, at one stage, I was looking after people dying at home. And when I would support someone who'd been through a whole process and ended up surrounded by relatives and family and, finally accepted, and then their life, they just get smaller and smaller. And finally, they actually take their last breath and pass away. And the only time I've ever felt that feeling, the love that's there when someone passes away like that, is when I used to deliver babies. And I'm like, wow, this is the same feeling, which was astonishing. And in fact, a true midwife is supposed to look after babies being born and people dying. And their thing is, they are the midwife. They marry the coming in and the going out stage. And it's looked at as a circle. That when you die, you go into the place and then you come back in, or however you look at it. But, there is a death, which is another example of a rite of passage we do completely in the wrong way, where we put people in a room and we put a curtain around them and we sort of deny it. It's ridiculous. And if it's done well, is an incredibly beautiful thing and is a hugely necessary part of life. And then in terms of it being done well, yes. So, my mother passed away 2.5 years ago. And fortunately, she passed away beautifully. And I was able to be there in the hospital and hold her hand for a month before she did die. And we had family around. And then there are many traditions that have really good rites of passage processes. So, my family is of the Jewish faith. So after Mum died, we stayed at home for a whole week, and people came and visited us, and they brought food and they shared stories about Mum, and we looked at photos. And it's called sitting Shiva, where for a week the immediate family stays at home and the relatives come and visit them. And then in theory, for a month, there are things you don't do. You don't go out to dancing or things like that. So, and then at the end of that, they say you get up, you walk around the block, and it's like you go out and you get back on with life. But they really give you a period of time to reflect and think about it and mourn and hear stories. And what happens is, initially there's this incredible uncontrollable grief and tears and everything goes with it. And then at a certain time it passes. But what's really important is to let those tears come out and to sort of be in that grief rather than trying to run away from it. Because if you do run away, I believe it'll come out later, or it'll come out somewhere inappropriately. So the most important thing I feel is to dedicate some time to whatever the rite of passage is. And if it's someone dying, to actually take that time and just really be there and allow people to come around and visit and feel into it and allow the grief process to actually do its own thing. And the biggest problem is when someone dies, that the relatives come for the funeral and 2 days later they're back at work, which is the same as when a baby's born. The biggest problem is if we try and get back on our feet too early. Whereas ideally when a baby's born, both parents have a significant amount of time off, there's support from the community, all of those things. Whereas what often happens is a baby's born, one parent often the father might get a week or 10 days, and then they're gone, and then mum's basically on her own with the kid. Grandparents live somewhere else in the country, so there's no support.
Mm.
And it can become an incredibly difficult and depressing situation. So, in a nutshell, I believe all of these major times, if we look at them and we think about what would be a really healthy way to do this, and we have a look what was done traditionally, and we go, okay, how do we bring this and do it appropriately today? We can just be doing so many things so much better.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff, Arne. What you're doing is, a little bit out of the box. Well, not in the sense that it's been done for thousands of years before, but it's a little bit different in that it's the reason you're wanting to make it mainstream is because it is not yet mainstream. Have you had any moments where you've felt a little bit, out of place, or not rejected? Rejected's too strong a word, but people not understanding you. You feel misunderstood or too weird, and you need to pull back.
I've had any moments, probably about 25 years worth. It's only the last 5 years that there's been this real recognition, I feel, increasing recognition of we need to be doing it differently. And COVID really exaggerated that realization. Didn't create it, but it exaggerated it. And more people and schools are going, we need to be doing this. And I think that's part of it. But, the most on the edge thing for me was leaving my work as a doctor. And, there were people who were really confronted by that, including my parents, but all sorts of people. How can you leave as a doctor? You've trained for 6 years and you're going to make so much money. And I'm like, well, it wasn't what I wanted to be doing. And whilst being a doctor is a noble profession, the system is not, unfortunately. The system is very economically based. And a lot of it was dealing with people who were unwell, often from lifestyle factors, and trying to support that. Whereas I'm more interested in preventative medicine. And I still consider I'm working as a doctor, except now I'm doing preventative medicine outside of the system rather than curative medicine inside the system. But I think anyone who leaves, a sort of a marked career and moves to something they're really passionate about needs to know there will be many roadblocks and doubters and naysayers and all of that. But for me, because I just believed it was what I was meant to do and what I'm passionate about, and I've definitely been called stubborn and pig-headed and all of those things. But I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to keep doing it. And then eventually, but literally it's taken 25 years, it's starting to break through. And for me, it's joining other ancient traditions that have come into the mainstream. So yoga, is now a mainstream practice, which has been around for 5,000 years. Mindfulness meditation is now pretty much mainstream. Doesn't mean everyone does it, but it's well accepted and it's well available. Interestingly, psychedelics are having a huge renaissance, and the TGA has just supported the use of psilocybin and MDMA for resistant depression and anxiety, and there's great success happening globally around that. And I want rites of passage to be the next thing that is a mainstream process, and we go, how could we not do that?
Yeah. Well, thank goodness you've stuck with it, and we all appreciate the work that you're doing, you and your whole team. Many of the people who are listening to this podcast would be leaders, and I view parents as leaders, but also leaders who want to have a positive impact in their community. You've been at it for 25 years. You've done that. Is there some pieces of advice or just one piece of advice that you'd give to up and coming leaders in that social impact space?
Couple of pieces of advice. One is, stick with it. But the other is find people who've already been down the track and just listen to their story and Don't ask them to tell you what to do. Ask them to share their story. And then from their story, work out things that you would do the same and things that you would do different. Because a true story will have successes and failures well mixed together in it.
Yeah.
And we don't have to keep repeating the wheel. Social impact is not a new thing. And, there are well-known pathways. What is different is the thing that we want to have social impact on. So that will, if it's children, or if it's single mums, or if it's, postnatal dads, or, that will change what we do on the outside, but the deeper stuff around core principles of how to set up, create, and move through a social impact program have been well looked at. So keep at it and find people who've already done it and ask them to share their stories. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that's good advice. And on that, if people want to connect with you and the team and all of the good stuff that you're doing at the Rites of Passage Institute, what's the best way to reach out?
Sure. The best way is through our website, the ritesofpassageinstitute.org. And if anybody Googles Rites of Passage, spelled RITES, Rites of Passage, the first thing you'll find is a tattoo convention. And then probably the next thing you'll find is our institute, the Rites of Passage Institute. And I really encourage people to check out our programs and then to check out the leadership training that I do over 3 days. That's a great way for someone to come and not only have an experience of their own, to review and to do their own rite of passage, but to learn about the framework which they can then potentially utilize in their own lives and with people around them.
No, that's good. We'll definitely put those links below where people are listening, so they can bypass the tattoo convention and go straight to you.
Great. Thanks, Andrew.
It's been an absolute honor to spend a little bit of time with you. Like I said before we got on, I've known about you for a number of years now, but to have this conversation is, a dream come true for me and a real privilege. So thank you so much for sharing your time, and I'm excited that I get to share it with a whole bunch of other people as well.
Great, Andrew. Super happy. I look forward to hearing the podcast and putting it out there so that more people can also hear what you're doing. So thank you very much for everything that you're doing and creating the difference that you are in people's lives.
Thanks, Arne.
And there you have it, the legendary Arne Rubinstein. And I am so happy that this first episode of the new podcast was with Arne. Like I said right back at the beginning, his life, his vision, his mission to make Rites of Passage mainstream for young men and women, it really does embody this concept of the hero's journey and these gifts from the edge, these treasures that have been brought back from their time in the wilderness, their time leading and doing great new things. So really stoked to be sharing this as the first episode. There was a really cool piece of advice that he gave to any leader in the social impact space, and parents included, and that's to get with other leaders and to ask them their story. And I really loved how Arne said that, because that is exactly what we are doing here on this podcast. So if you haven't already, I encourage you on iTunes, on YouTube, on Spotify, subscribe to this podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode going forward. If this is the first time you've been here and the first time you've met me, I encourage you to go out and check out my website. It's andrewlord.com.au. Go and check that out. There's some great resources there. I suggest that you start with the lifestyle design quiz. It's an awesome little resource, 5 minutes of your time, and it'll give you a free personalized report with your strength profile, your focus for growth, and also some coaching questions to help move you your next step forward on your journey. So, after this, I'm going to go look at Arne's leadership training. I'm also going to go check out his website, the Rites of Passage Institute. I'm going to put some links just below so that you can do the same. There's lots of treasures still out there to find. I wish you all the very best as you continue on your journey. See you back here soon. That's all from me. Bye for now.